My name is Suzanne Poland. I work for USAID. And I have a question concerning the productive safety net and some of the remarks that Mr. Jafera has given us. I think that many of us who work with the safety net and the food security program are seeing maybe the beginnings of what we hope is a great success. But we've spent 5 years working on it. We just went through a rigorous year of evidence gathering and revising. Are there lessons learned in how we could learn from the studies that you've done to maybe change the course or revise as we go along to make the food security program, the safety net, household asset building, the community public works a proven success?
The productive safety net or issues of safety nets in general are not covered in this volume. One of the reasons being that there are very few safety net programs in the world that actually have an agricultural component to them. It's more about transfers of resources to vulnerable households living in the rural areas, but not necessarily directly linked to agriculture. But having said that, we did think a lot about this issue, and I would raise 2 points that maybe the Minister would also like to comment on. One very good point that comes out of Millions Fed and is consistent with the productive safety net experience in Ethiopia is investing in impact assessment. I think we can all be very pleased with the fact that the Ethiopian government and the donor community invested substantial resources in tracking over time the impact of the productive safety net program in Ethiopia. And this gives us a body of evidence to work from, to strengthen the program, expand the program, and change the program as the government sees fit, based on recommendations of these assessments. So those types of investments, impact assessment, are crucial to knowing where we are and where we're going. I guess the other point I'd make coming out of Millions Fed is that there's a chapter, the last chapter on homestead food production in Bangladesh. And I think some of you might find this very interesting. In Bangladesh, the government, through a national study, realized that one of the big problems facing hunger was related to micronutrient deficiencies, not having adequate access to vitamin A, zinc, iron, and other types of sources of nutrition. So they worked with Helen Keller International, which is an NGO, and lots of local NGOs, local community organizations, to promote the cultivation and consumption of micronutrient-rich vegetables and small livestock. And in effect, this was a safety net program of sorts. And it got to the core of the issue. It wasn't only about increasing agricultural production, it was increasing the availability of good quality food. And in Ethiopia, of course, diets being what they are, there's probably scope for increasing micronutrient consumption. And I know there are programs working on that. It's something to think about for the future. I'll leave my remarks there.
Thank you very much. Actually, programs like we are undertaking in Ethiopia are very rare because we try to design the productive safety net program according to the objective situation here in Ethiopia. So we try to make it better fit the objective situation, especially in the drought-prone areas. We have a comprehensive food security program with nearly four main components. These components are aligned one another so that they will address the issue of food insecurity in those drought-prone areas. One of the components is the productive safety net program. We say it productive because it's not a mere transfer of resource to the beneficiaries. But what the program does is it will help the beneficiaries to fill their food gap by transferring food or cash. While doing this, the beneficiaries have to involve themselves in the communal asset building. This program is, by its very nature, protects the regulation of assets of these drought-prone, food insecure families. By doing so, safety net program protects these households from asset depletion. And we have another program, another component under this comprehensive food security program, the household asset building. This program is financed by the government, 100% financed by the Ethiopian government. The Ethiopian government each year allocates 2 billion for this program, for this household asset building component. This component will help the beneficiaries of the productive safety net program to build household assets. What this component does is beneficiaries will be given different choice of technology, so that the many of technology options will be given to the beneficiaries. They will choose the one which best fits their interest. Then the government will avail credit to undertake this technology. There are extension services which are given to the beneficiaries, the households, so that using all these sorts of inputs, the household will gradually build household assets. The safety net, the productive safety net program protects the asset depletion of the household. The household asset building program builds the household asset. Then we have a very fast means of food securing program, the voluntary resettlement program, whereby people living in food insecure areas will be resettled in areas where there is potentially fertile land, so that within 1 to 2 years they will be able to come out of the poverty. And recently we are trying to include another innovation, community complementary investment. I think Ms. Suzanne is well aware of this component. What this does is we are trying to develop the existing surface and underground water potential, so that we can scale up small-scale irrigation activities in these food drought-prone areas, so that the graduation from this program is enhanced. So what's going on in this country as far as the food security program looks like, actually I'm addressing the tip of the iceberg, because the program is comprehensive. There are a lot of interventions under this comprehensive program, and where, as I have mentioned in my keynote address, we are currently things are improving in this drought, in these food insecure areas. We are now currently designing. Actually, we have designed the program. It is already approved by the World Bank. The third phase productive safety net program will be started in 2010, and it will continue being implemented up to 14. So this is what I am to comment.
What you may not need to study much in detail is the community-based participatory watershed development. As you know, Ethiopia has been on food aid for many years, decades, because of recurrent droughts, land degradation, and so on. And one of our major partners, the WFP, has been giving food aid for decades. But we realize that unless we do something with the environment, unless we stop the degradation of the area, we cannot achieve food security in these food insecure areas. For this reason, together with our stakeholders, WFP, USAID, GTZ, NAMZ, we devised the community-based participatory watershed development as a national strategy to rehabilitate degraded areas and also lift food insecure population out of poverty. In 2005, the Ethiopian government declared that this is the only strategy to rehabilitate degraded lands and also at the same time to help food insecure areas. Now, in the past 4 to 5 years, we have seen wonders. People who went to Tigray, people who went to South Wallo or other areas, and it means that those areas were so degraded that they cannot be rehabilitated or made productive any longer, changed their mind. And they said, so Ethiopian land degradation can be stopped, people can be food secure, and this was history. Since then, we have seen a number of people, ministers, politicians visiting these areas from Africa and so on. So, what I would like to say in short is that this community-based area rehabilitation and food security improvement approach is a potential approach that you can think of in the future. And the World Bank and all others have endorsed it, and it's working. This is what I just wanted to say. Thank you for the time.
Because of time, I'm going to make it short. But the thing I want to ask is, we have technologies. For example, in the crop improvement program, we say we have improved varieties. This improved varieties, the seed, and we talked about the grain, is the link between the researcher, the extension, and the development agents. Currently in the country, we have a problem of seed. I think the Ethiopian Seed Corporation is enterprises producing 5% of the requirement. I know my institute, the Institute of Agricultural Research, is trying to address this problem in a way that we are trying to multiply improved seeds in all the research centers where we have water. But this is not enough. We are doing this because we are embarrassed. Because we say technologies are there, it's not getting to the farmer. So I think I'm asking my minister now, what is the progress in this improving seed supply to the farmer? Because Professor was talking about the success in the watershed. I agree with him, but this thing is very crucial and it needs to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think currently we identified 3 major bottlenecks when it comes to technology scaling up and scaling out. One of the bottlenecks, maybe the critical one, is the availability of inputs. Once we publicize different technologies, what comes next is the availability of these technologies which are proven success. So my government is trying to resolve this problem. As you well know, especially when it comes to crop improved varieties, the process starts right from the research centers. So it needs the multiplication starting from the breed line up to the basic seed in the research centers. So currently we are trying to avail enough amount of basic seeds from our research centers. But this is not the end of the history. After we have basic seeds, we have to multiply so that it will be easily available to the final, the ultimate user, the farmer. To do this, what we are trying to do is we are multiplying seed on smallholder farmers level. We are trying to use our parastatal, the seed enterprise, and we are trying to involve the private sector in this seed multiplication program, so that the problem of these improved varieties, which are very critical for increasing production and productivity, will be available to the demand that the farmer has. So the effort is there. Formerly, the multiplication of seed was undertaken using only one season, the Meher season. What we are trying to do recently is we are multiplying these improved varieties using irrigation, so that we will have two season production as far as these technologies are concerned. We believe this will, at the end, will resolve the problem that we have currently with regard to this technology availability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. John Graham, also of USAID, apologies for that. A quick comment and then a quick question. The comment is that I didn't know the content of Millions Fed, so I was very pleased to see that the rinderpest elimination was one of the major studies in there, which is particularly relevant for Ethiopia. You know, I think Ethiopians know about the great famine that was caused by rinderpest here, but we have to remind ourselves that really the biggest famine in Ethiopian recorded history was caused by rinderpest between, I think, 1888 and 1892, we'll stand corrected, where almost an estimated third of the population of Ethiopia perished mainly because of loss of traction for plowing. So I think it's a very relevant issue for Ethiopia. The question I have is to put researchers on the spot and say, you know, you guys, we're not familiar with the content of this, but you are. And you have all these people here, as well as the Minister Tafari, of course. So what are the, what's the advice that you would give to Ethiopia based on these case studies? What do you think are the 2 or 3 most relevant points for Ethiopia that we should take from these lessons learned?
Very much for that question. Let me say that I am based in Ethiopia for the last 5 years. So having worked on research topics in Ethiopia for 5 years does not make me an expert in anything. I defer to my Ethiopian colleagues who are the experts on many of these topics. But if I were to draw from Millions Fed and think about Ethiopia, which I've done many times, I guess I'd make, let me make 3 points. One, success is not a substitute for strategy, as my colleague, Rajul Pandya made. And Ethiopia, I think, has a very strong track record in this field of having a very good strategy for agricultural development. The Adli framework, as well as being compliant with the CADA goals, and investing in agricultural research. Remember, Ethiopia is one of the few African countries that funds agricultural research from its own budget resources, not from donor funds, largely. That's something I think to be proud of. So agricultural research, building rural roads, strengthening cooperatives and cooperative unions, investing massively in agricultural extension, and of course taking risks like commodity exchange. So one lesson we learned from Millions Fed certainly is that if you have a strategy that contains lots of these bright spots, then you're on the way to something. But having said that, a strategy is only as good as the willingness you have to take risks. And innovation and exploration was another real lesson learned from Millions Fed. Don't fear failure and learn from mistakes and explore. And I think that innovation, exploration, and experimentation is key to seeing these successes really take root and really expand. And sometimes I think taking risks is a real challenge in many countries. And then the third, I mentioned earlier, was impact assessment, investing in the evidence. We've done very good work on the productive food safety net, and done impact assessment work on that. think there's more that needs to be done on the side of extension, teasing out the causalities, the massive investment in extension, how has that affected agricultural productivity, rigorously and independently assessed. I think there's a lot of potential there, and I know at the highest levels of government, Ethiopia is committed to that. So, those are 3 points that I would say, based on my own experience, that draw from Millions Fed and speak to Ethiopia.
Thank you.
Please. I have stayed in Ethiopia maybe less than David, so if David is not an expert, I'm neither an expert. But I'd like to respond to the question raised that I see the 3 things you'd like to talk about. I would like to say input supply is an area that needs to be looked at. There is massive investments in extension, but our recent review of the Ethiopian extension system showed that there are still a lot of problems that need to be addressed. And there were several recommendations, and we're going to be working with the ministry to try to see how to straighten them. Training of the DAs, the specialities, and how to send 3 DAs to a district, and are they specialists in the area that they are? How do they interact? And beyond the 3 DAs, there are other issues in agriculture. How do you address these issues? I think we need to look at extension again and see what needs to be done. The third area, I think, is market access. How do you make sure that the farmers get access to markets? Now, the overall thing that I would suggest for tackling this is, one, to develop the private sector. There's a lot of still big government in agriculture. We need to see how the private sector can play a bigger role than they are doing now. We need to go beyond cooperatives and look at farmer organizations to say how grassroots and farm organizations that are endogenous, building from within themselves, can move agriculture. And that would be my suggestion for Ethiopia at this point in time.
Very much. My name is Sheikh Ahmed from Oxman, DD. I'm referring to the slide which was showing lots of key success factors, which included complementary investment, insurance, in the climate change development. My question is that does this refer to food insecure areas? These success factors work in food insecure areas, or it works only in the food sector areas, or we need to strike a balance? So in the Ethiopian context, we have to see that these success factors, where we apply these in the food insecure areas or in the food secure areas. So that's my question.
My name is Ratta from Italian Development Corporation. My question refers to the book on Millions Fed. So you considered many cases, many success stories. If you come, for instance, to Malawi, one success case is the fertilizer subsidy. So how do you see this fertilizer subsidy in achieving green revolution in Africa, in achieving food security in Africa? That's one of my questions. The other is population pressure is one factor that is a cause for food insecurity in Africa, apart from land degradation and other causes. So how do you see the population issue?
Take the first question on the success factors, whether they apply to food insecure or food secure areas. We didn't distinguish it that way. We were looking across these 20 successes and recognizing that basically the successes in a sense started out from the base of food insecurity and hopefully moving towards food security. So we were looking for factors that essentially enabled these agricultural development per se interventions to be successful in reducing hunger. 2 things to point there. We were focusing not on agricultural development successes per se. We were focusing on those successes that transformed, that translated into improved food security. There are successes in agricultural development that don't always translate into improved food security. So I do think we need to make that distinction. And the second point I want to make is partly to a comment made earlier. Here we we're looking at the successes that are large scale in nature, or that had large scale impacts rather. There are, of course, very many other successes. David mentioned we got about 300 nominations or so of successes, some of which are successes in the making, some of which are interesting but are not relevant, some of which are too early. If I were to do a companion piece, or I hope, frankly, that somebody else will do this, is to look at all these wonderful small-scale successes and how to scale them up. Because there are many successes at the small-scale level that were not scaled up effectively, or they were not even tried, or in many instances were tried that didn't translate into large scale. So I think it is also important that somewhere down the road that we look also at how do you effectively scale up to have large-scale impacts.
Yeah, I think the other question.
Absolutely. Let me first take this point about Malawi. Malawi's fertilizer subsidy program has been in the news. A combination of the program and good rains over the last 3 years have improved food security for many people, millions in Malawi, and certainly it's viewed as a success. One of the reasons why it's not in millions fed, of course, is that it doesn't meet our criteria. It's a very new success, if you will. 3 years of evidence, and that too controversial evidence, is not enough to fixate it into millions fed. Let me also point out that the Malawi experience is controversial because everybody's talking about it. Remember that the provision of fertilizer subsidies cost the Ministry of Agriculture 46% of its budget. And that's 46% of the budget that could go into other areas like research, like all sorts of seed multiplication, who knows what. I'm not saying it's the right or the wrong allocation. I'm just saying that it's an expensive program that many other countries actually can't replicate. In national terms, it was 5% of GDP, that subsidy program. That's pretty big just for subsidies. And there's evidence emerging that says, if you look at the effect of the fertilizer subsidy, in fact, it's largely a displacement effect. Many farmers would have bought that fertilizer anyway. Only a small percentage of them actually benefited in terms of having access to more fertilizer for production. So the displacement effect is fairly significant. I point you to a chapter in Millions Fed on the liberalization in the 1990s of Kenya's fertilizer market. And there, you found that over the last 17 years, the entry of private traders into the fertilizer market has not only allowed for smaller packaging, more appropriate to small farmers of fertilizer, but has also increased the purchasing points, the retailing and stockist points for farmers to buy fertilizer, such that over those 17 years, the distance or time needed to purchase fertilizer by a small farmer has been reduced by half, with the same effects on the liberalization of the maize market. They only have to travel half the distance to sell their maize. And generally, even despite these price fluctuations we've seen in the international fertilizer market, especially in recent years, fertilizer prices in Kenya have been largely steady because the costs of getting it out have decreased with more market traders competing to provide it on low cost. And then quickly, this question of population pressure. Well, population growth is a challenge many developing countries face, almost every, and certainly it is very significant. When in Ethiopia, many times when we have this development debate, we talk about population, and yes, it's a huge challenge. But also remember that going back 200 years in Japan and Taiwan, Korea, many of the other Southeast Asian nations, they had far higher population densities in the rural sector than Ethiopia does in terms of per capita hectare acreage. So a lot can be achieved. I mean, look at rice production in China, wheat production in China, or in Taiwan, or South Korea. Much higher yields than we have in Africa, even despite really high population density. I'm not saying that that's a substitute for family planning programs and demographic transitions to reduce the growth rate. We need that. But just remember that you can still achieve a lot with a high population by investing in agricultural development.